I used to live on airplanes for 25 years. Penny and I were moving all over the world, but I was teaching in Europe. I'd been on the road for several months. So sometimes if I had the right contacts, I could arrange to do a plant medicine ceremony when I was off, because I would teach usually on the weekends and I would have the week off, and we'd often be traveling to another city and then getting ready in the next city. But I just happened to be in this one large city for multiple weeks. And so I scheduled myself a ceremony. And that particular ceremony, I was using LSD. And I had studied LSD, but what a lot of people don't realize, and this is not just LSD, this is other drugs or medicines as well. But if you read the literature on LSD, you'll find that there are foods that interact with it. Some foods can weaken the effect of it, and some foods can amplify the effect of it. And then if you mix LSD with other drugs, it magnifies the strength of any other drug multiple times usually. Well, what happened was was doing my preparation, and that day my wife had just come back from the organic butcher, and there's a very good organic butcher where I was at that we'd used several times. And so to take some food with me for the later stage of the ceremony, I brought an apple and I brought a piece of smoked lamb sausage, all organic. And so this is about 5 hours into the ceremony, and I hiked way off into the woods, miles off into the woods, to be completely alone and just go into meditation for my ceremony. And then I got hungry in the later stage of the journey, and I ate the apple and I was fine. But then I thought, well, I'm going to eat this sausage now. And within about 3 or 4 minutes of eating the sausage, all hell broke loose. I was having severe anxiety attacks. My sympathetic nervous system turned on so hard I was sweating, literally like I had just come out of a sweat lodge. I thought I was going to die. I literally thought I was going to die. In fact, it was so bad, I had to call forth one of my power animals and say, please lead me to home, because I was so disoriented, I didn't even know where I was at. I couldn't remember how I got there. I was in really bad shape. I thought, holy shit, I'm going to die out here today. And the only thing I knew it could have been, it wasn't going to be an apple, because I'd used apples before. So I went back and started doing a bunch of research, and what I found out, it was that the chemicals that were created in the lamb sausage from the smoking had interacted with the LSD and created another chemical that damn near killed me. So the point that I'm trying to drive at here is this is why someone that's very skilled at the use of these medicines is very important. Because you can't just throw anything in your mouth on a lot of these medicines, because you can get cross reactions and interreactions that produces molecules that your body does not know what to do with. It can have severe effects on your physiology and your psyche. And I'm a very stable guy on journeys. I mean, you can talk to Kyle. I can pretty much handle pretty much anything you can throw at me. But in this situation, I wasn't even on what I would consider a high dose, but I was in a situation where I thought, this is it, I'm going to die today. And it was only because I ate a piece of smoked organic lamb sausage and it interacted with that LSD, and it damn near killed me. And thank God I had done a lot of work with power animals, because one of my power animals is a black panther, and it came out of my body, got in front of me, and walked me. And I followed it just like I was a blind man. And I ended up on a main trail, and all of a sudden 2 old men showed up on mountain bikes. I could barely talk, but I said, I knew the name of the town. I said, how do I get back to that town? And they say, 6 kilometers that way. You just keep walking on this trail, it'll take you right there. And I had no idea where I was at. But by the time I walked the 6 kilometers, I'd regained enough consciousness to get my way home. But honestly, that could have killed somebody, and it could have killed me. And it was something that I never expected. I didn't even know that the smoking of a sausage could produce the chemicals that would do that until I had a reason to go. And it took me a few hours of research to actually find this information. And I could have been dead. So have you got any comments in that regard?
Yeah, the first thing that you get taught in the Amazon are the appropriate foods to use and not use with all of the different plants, specifically for the reason that you're describing. So there's an ayahuasca safe diet, and it's now in the culture. And early on, I was really concerned that Westerners wouldn't follow that, and other cultural, people from other cultures wouldn't follow the ayahuasca safe diet. They would think it's not important, etc. And luckily, it actually got embraced, pretty well. All things considered, kind of throughout the global community around ayahuasca, there was a real understanding of the importance of its safety. But for instance, you don't eat meats of high heavy fats. There's a number of local meats that you don't eat, especially because they eat different kinds of seed pods, and in their fat, then they store those chemicals. And then if you eat their fat, you get the chemicals that were stored in their fat, and those counter interact with ayahuasca. And so some of the foods that the animals eat are actually counterindicated. And so then you don't eat those kinds of foods. But predominantly you eat very small amounts of fish or chicken or vegetarian meals. You don't eat different kinds of large beans like lima beans. They can have a chemical in them that can create hypertension. Same thing with fermented foods, large amounts of avocado as well. You have very reduced amounts of sugar. Even just a small amount of refined sugar can have a counterindication. You don't have any kind of alcohol. You don't mix any other kinds of substances with it. It's counterindicated to mix other kinds of plant medicines with it at that time. You don't have hot peppers or spicy like capsicum-filled peppers. You can have a negative reaction associated with that as well. And even sexual activity before, during, and after is considered prohibited for up to 3 days, and in some cultures up to a week or even a month. And so there's an actual tremendous amount of restriction around food and diet so that you make sure you don't have any kinds of chemicals that create that reaction. And even on the days of ceremony, it's recommended to have a very light lunch or even skip lunch. But I think it's best to have a very light lunch so that by the time ceremony time comes in, you fully digested all of the food out of your stomach and you drink ayahuasca directly to the stomach. In the case of San Pedro mescaline-based, or Wachuma, it's known as, during the ceremonies, they go for sometimes 15 to 20, 24 hours even. And in those cases, obviously you need to eat something to keep going. But we eat dried fruits and nuts and raw cacao and fruit. So dried fruits, fresh fruits and nuts and raw cacao during that time. And it works really well for maintaining a light balance. But you think about how light that is compared to like your typical, lunch meal or something like that. In terms of psilocybin, there are chemicals that can intensify the experience, and mixing it with other kinds of plants isn't always the best idea. So a lot of people talk about psilocybin and cannabis together. I think it's important to be careful about that mix. Anytime you're—
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, actually.
Yeah, mixing.
There's a conflict of opinion out there, because I've heard shaman that are pretty well knowledgeable that I would trust say, oh, it's fine to mix those two. And then I've heard other ones say you shouldn't mix those two. Whenever I see a conflict like that, if it's safe, I test it myself. But what I've found is that the spirit of the marijuana is so very different than the spirit of mushrooms that it's hard to really decide who's your teacher. And you get kind of like too many voices in your head. You don't really know who's on first, to use a baseball term.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a double dissociative. So you have one kind of dissociation taking place and another kind at the same time. I don't think it's like one's right or wrong. I really shy away from those kinds of terms in and around these plants. I just think that if it's dangerous, you shouldn't do it. And if it's beyond your skill level, you shouldn't do it.
And if you don't know, don't do it.
And if you don't know, you absolutely shouldn't do it. So it depends on the severity of the reaction you're going to have, and also the dose. So in terms of mixing them, I always think when you start mixing the plant medicines together, that you have to know that there's a kind of synergy that's taking place, or there's a kind of antagonist that's taking place that makes it even harder on you. And that traditionally could be seen as a test. And maybe it's used traditionally for that kind of a purpose, but then that's a more advanced kind of practice, and not something you do if you're not ready for that more advanced kind of practice. I think of it like free solo rock climbing. Like, like it's not even, you don't want to free solo a rock that you're going to fall off of. But there are some people who can free solo things that I can't climb with ropes, but they can do it free solo. So they can go and do that, but that doesn't mean I can. And I think in the plant medicines, there's a real need for that level of scrutiny to understand what you're ready for. And that's not what a person who's had thousands of ceremonies of experience is ready for.